He coldly ignored me for 3 whole years, my fiancé. At the rare banquet in City H, he publicly proposed to his first love. Later, I sweetly announced on social media, getting married. He called late at night, "Jane, I never said I would marry you." I chuckled, "I never said the groom was you either." Then, a set of photos flooded the internet, shocking the whole city. The man in power in City H opened his arms, let me throw myself into his embrace, and willingly lowered his head, allowing me to kiss him. Chapter 1. As I stood up in my evening gown, the makeup artist couldn't help but whisper, "Jane, you look stunning in this dress." I thanked softly, and as I walked out, there was a commotion downstairs. My fiancé of 3 years, Robert, walked out with a young, pretty woman on his arm. More absurdly, her dress was identical to mine. Tonight was a rare banquet in City H in decades. The people present were all at the top of the pyramid, sharp-eyed and astute. Naturally, with one glance, they could tell that what I was wearing was nothing but a high-quality knockoff. For the first time in 21 years, I dressed up so lavishly. Turns out, I was meant to be a lavishly dressed clown. Chapter 2. Robert, who is this lady beside you? Someone couldn't help but ask. Robert held the hand of the woman beside him, my girlfriend, Claire. But after tonight, she will be my fiancée. What about Jane? Robert looked coldly at me. The engagement between the Johnson and Smith families has been terminated. These 3 years, the Johnson family has done everything for the Smith family. He wasn't wrong. Without the $1 billion dowry at the time of engagement, the Smith family would have gone bankrupt long ago. My parents, brothers, and sisters, would they still enjoy their current luxurious lifestyle? Robert knelt down, took out a diamond ring, and proposed to Claire. She cried uncontrollably and threw herself into Robert's arms. He gently wiped away her tears, comforted her, and kissed her. I watched Claire being surrounded by those flatterers and socialites, engaging in lively conversations. After tonight, she would no longer be a washed-up minor celebrity and a third party at the mercy of others. As for me, Jane, in City H, the Smith family, I'm afraid I will have no place to stand. Chapter 3. Excuse me, can I get through? A voice sounded behind me. I turned around to see 2 elegant-looking girls holding snacks, impatiently eyeing me. I moved aside. Her dress is so low quality. Yeah, what kind of fabric is this knockoff made of? It probably causes allergies when touched. She has the nerve to stand here, really embarrassing. I walked expressionlessly towards the resting area in the corner, pretending not to hear their malicious comments. My phone rang, and I answered it. My mother's voice came through angrily and embarrassed. "Jane, the Johnson family wants to call off the engagement, and they want a refund of $50 million. For 3 years, you couldn't hold on to a man's heart. You are truly useless. You figure out the $50 million yourself. The Smith family doesn't have a single penny to spare." I stared at the phone after hanging up, feeling like my heart was being suffocated with discomfort. All the splendor and glamour were completely irrelevant to me. I just wanted to escape quickly. Chapter 4. I heard Mr. Turner returned to City H yesterday and will attend the banquet tonight. Seems unlikely, Mr. Turner hardly ever attends such events. True, the last time this gentleman made a public appearance was in the news on the front page. I pressed on my faintly aching heart, opened my bag to find some medicine. The rustling sound alarmed the 2 talking people, their conversation abruptly stopping as they walked away gradually. My heart started to ache more, cramping, the corset of my dress almost suffocating me. I couldn't bother to search for the medicine anymore. I tried to unfasten the hidden buttons, trying to breathe deeply. But after several attempts, I couldn't succeed. I gasped for air, my face turned pale, my long hair disheveled and falling over my shoulders. Not far away, the banquet had just begun. My ex-fiancé and his sweetheart were probably dancing sweetly together. And I might quietly die on this quiet deck. Chapter 5. Mr. Turner, are you going in now? Wyatt didn't reply, just took the cigarette case handed by his secretary. He took out a light gray cigarette, then opened an exquisite small box. The cigarette between his fingers remained unlit, lightly dabbed on the deep reddish-brown fragrant powder. After flicking off the excess, he reached out for the lighter from the secretary. The secretary quickly handed over the lighter, and Wyatt lit the cigarette. "You go ahead, I'll finish this cigarette," Wyatt said, taking a few steps towards the railing of the deck. "It's windy here, be careful." The crowd around him tactfully dispersed one by one. This time back in City H, Wyatt was bound to take things further. Since then, in the entire City H, if he said something, no one dared to say otherwise. Tonight's banquet, the organizers pulled all their connections to get him to show up. He originally had no interest. But the headache caused by the pressure to marry from his elders at home upon his return to City H yesterday made him take advantage of this opportunity to steal some leisure time. But as soon as he had smoked half of the cigarette, Wyatt noticed the slender and frail figure not far away. He extinguished the cigarette, turned around to leave. But then he heard a muffled sound on the deck. Wyatt slowly turned back to look. The moonlight was dim, casting a shadow that was both mysterious and alluring on the deck. Chapter 6. My face must have turned ghostly pale. In the dim moonlight, the once beautiful face now appeared distorted. I looked at the unfamiliar man in front of me, feeling like I had grasped a lifeline. I held onto his sleeve tightly. The instinct to survive gave me an unusual strength. I ended up pulling his arm towards my chest. My breathing was alarmingly rapid, my heart rate already irregular. He glanced at me, seeming to understand my discomfort. He actually kneeled down, his slender fingers gripping my wrist bone, calmly asking, "Where is the zipper of your dress?" I couldn't speak, struggling and grabbing his hand, pressing it against my chest. His furrowed eyebrows relaxed as he removed my hand, looking down at the neckline of the dress. Then, a row of hidden buttons was skillfully opened by his fingers. I felt a lightness all over, the tightness in my chest suddenly disappearing. Air rushed in, and I greedily took deep breaths. But I completely forgot that my dress was tight-fitting today, with only petal-shaped invisible breast stickers on my chest. And now, the front of the dress was wide open, already exposed for all to see. Chapter 7. It wasn't until the warmth-wrapped gentleman's suit fell heavily on me that I suddenly snapped out of it. I bit my lip for a while before blushing, looking up and whispering a thank you. "Can you stand up?" I nodded, one hand clutching the suit jacket, the other hand holding onto the railing, only managing to stand up with some effort. "Do you want me to contact your family or friends?" I quickly shook my head. "No need, I just need to rest for a while and I'll be fine." His phone suddenly rang a few times. I saw him walk to the side and answer the phone. "I've already made arrangements for the marriage. Don't worry, I won't let Grandpa leave with regrets." Seeming a bit impatient, he lit a cigarette. The flickering of the cigarette illuminated his cold, hard profile, and suddenly I remembered where I had seen this person before. At that moment, he turned his head and our eyes met. I quickly lowered my gaze. He finished the call and walked over to me, the smell of the cigarette in his hand heavy in the air. I coughed uncomfortably a few times. "Sorry." He gentlemanly put out the cigarette. Then he gestured towards the suit on me, "Leave the clothes to the waiter." My face immediately turned red again. I nodded slightly and whispered, "Okay." His gaze fell on my fingers. I was tightly gripping the lapel of his suit. The inner dress was loose, with only a layer of silicone breast stickers separating my skin from the delicate lining of the men's suit. It was an ambiguous situation known only to me. I felt slightly uncomfortable and subconsciously pulled my chest in. As he was about to turn and leave, I spoke softly. "I heard your phone call earlier. Can I make a deal with you?" I bravely raised my eyes to look at him. Perhaps he needed a wife, a trouble-free wife who could disappear at any time. And I needed 50 million to gain a pitiful freedom. A deal? "Miss Smith, what kind of deal do you want to make with me?" I was too nervous to notice that he knew my name. Do you need a wife?" I gathered my courage and gazed steadily at him. "I won't cause you any trouble and will do my best to cooperate with you. Of course, I won't bother you when you don't need me." He looked at me in the moonlight, his silver gray shirt and dark trousers wrapping around his slender yet straight body. His eyes didn't reveal any sharpness, but his jawline was firm. I noticed the watch on his wrist, probably worth the luxury yacht I was on. "What are your conditions?" I hesitated for a moment, feeling somewhat embarrassed as I slowly spoke. I need 50 million. For what purpose? I lowered my eyelashes, not daring to meet his gaze. But in front of strangers, it seemed like I could boldly show my embarrassment and confusion. My fiancé wants to call off the engagement and demands half of the dowry back, 50 million. I can't come up with it. Call off the engagement? He suddenly looked at me, his gaze unexpectedly sharp. Yes, call off the engagement. I chuckled lightly and raised my head. The sea breeze tousled my long hair, and I gazed into the depths of the night in confusion. I have no way out, sir. Chapter 8. I accept the deal, but I have one condition. I looked at him in disbelief. Sir? Get the marriage certificate within 3 days. So soon?
You just heard my phone call. My grandfather is not in good health and is eager to see his granddaughter-in-law.
After he finished, he raised an eyebrow and looked at me. Is it inconvenient? I quickly shook my head. No, it's fine. Then it's settled. The sea breeze grew stronger, and my long hair was blown messily across my face. Suddenly, he stepped forward and pushed aside the stray hair near my face, tucking it behind my ear. I'll have someone come to pick you up the day after tomorrow. But how do you know where I am? He didn't answer that question. When he withdrew his hand, it seemed like his fingers lightly brushed my face. But it felt like it was just my imagination. He left for a long time, and I was still stuck in that extremely unreal dream. It wasn't until Robert, slightly tipsy, suddenly approached, grabbing my wrist. Jane, for these 3 years, I've been waiting for you to bow down to me, to beg me. As long as you're willing to submit to me like those women, I'll give the Smith family not just 100 million, but 10 billion. You're drunk, Robert. I pushed him away forcefully, but a drunkard was truly persistent. His eyes bloodshot, he stared at me and then at the suit I was wearing. Whose clothes are you wearing? It's none of your business, Robert. None of my business? His handsome face twisted slightly. Jane, I want to see who dares to touch my woman, Jane. He gripped the suit I was wearing tightly and tore it open. I tried to hold on, but it was futile. The sea breeze surged, under the moonlight, everything was shimmering white. Jane, Robert murmured blankly. The next moment, a sharp female voice rang out. Jane. You have no shame. Oh my, how could she seduce someone else's fiancé by loosening her clothes like that? Robert can't take his eyes off her. Claire, just look at her moves. I snapped out of it, flustered, trying to cover up my attire. But Claire was already crying as she rushed towards me, ready to slap my face. Chapter 9. What's going on here? A deep male voice suddenly calmly sounded. Claire's movements froze, and the next second, Robert pulled her aside. I quickly stepped back, arms raised in a fluster to protect my chest. Everyone turned their heads at the sound, not knowing who exclaimed, "It's Mr. Turner." Which Mr. Turner? Who else could it be? Wyatt Turner. I slowly widened my eyes a bit and looked towards Wyatt behind the crowd. The man on the deck who had unfastened my corset just moments ago. The man who dared to propose to make me his wife and offer me 50 million. It turned out to be the famous Wyatt from H City. Wyatt glanced at me briefly before averting his gaze. Then, he turned to his female secretary and said something. The secretary immediately walked through the crowd towards me and helped me put on the suit jacket again. Miss Smith, let me take you downstairs to rest for a bit. I stiffly nodded in thanks. As she led me away, I couldn't help but look back. The crowd had dispersed quietly, everyone standing respectfully. Mr. Turner, this was all a misunderstanding. Robert, now mostly sober, was carefully trying to explain. What misunderstanding? Wyatt's voice remained calm, showing no signs of anger. I slowly stopped in my tracks, standing at the corner. The secretary did not rush me, waiting patiently. Robert's voice was slightly trembling. Claire is with me, my girlfriend. She misunderstood and acted out of line. Wyatt's eyes turned stern, showing some displeasure. I don't think among the socialites of H City there would be such a lack of manners. Robert was embarrassed, and Claire was on the verge of tears. Wyatt instructed his subordinate, escort this young lady off the ship. Robert, Claire cried, tugging at Robert's sleeve, unwilling to let go. Having mingled in the entertainment industry for years, she naturally understood the seriousness of the situation. Being kicked off the ship like this would soon spread throughout all of H City. She will become a laughingstock, with no chance of redemption. Mr. Turner, Claire knows she was wrong, please give her another chance. Wyatt glanced at him indifferently. You can leave together. Robert fell silent and withdrew his hand. Claire was quickly escorted off the ship. The crowd on the deck also dispersed quietly. The farce ended unexpectedly for everyone. Mr. Turner. The voice of the female secretary suddenly brought my thoughts back. I turned in surprise, and Wyatt was walking towards me. He gestured for the secretary to leave and gently asked me, Jane, are you scared? I shook my head in a daze. No, not at all. I'll take you back to rest. Wyatt raised his hand, lightly grasping my wrist. Is that okay? Dizzy, I turned my head, nodding randomly, as he led me forward. But just a few steps later, I felt a chill in my chest. In that moment of frozen steps, the nude petal-shaped breast patch fell from under the suit. Wyatt turned back, his gaze landing on that patch. Chapter 10. I was embarrassed to the point of wanting to die. He, however, calmly bent down, picked up the patch, neatly folded it, and put it in his pocket. He soothingly reassured me, it's dirty and can't be used again. I'll have someone bring clean clothes over later. My face was hot and flushed, turning red, and I quietly murmured, okay. Let's go. Wyatt held my hand again. The corridor wasn't long, and we quickly arrived at the rest area. He escorted me in and then left. I sat quietly alone for a while, only calming down after some time. But after calming down, I belatedly realized. At first, Wyatt called me Miss Smith. But just now, he called me Jane. He knew my name? Knew who I was? The secretary brought new clothes over. I took a bath, changed into clean clothes, and neatly folded Wyatt's suit jacket, ready to dry clean it and return it. Mr. Turner instructed, if Miss Smith wants to go back, let me personally escort you. The secretary appeared to be around 30 or 40, very professional. Please also tell Mr. Turner that I will take the clothes back for dry cleaning. No need to trouble yourself, Miss Smith, just leave it to me. I didn't insist and handed the bag to her, casually asking, how did Mr. Turner know my name? The female secretary just smiled and said, that's Mr. Turner's private matter. As I disembarked, I received a text message from an unfamiliar number. Jane, this is Wyatt, save my number. I stared at the message for a while before replying, okay, saved. I'll come pick you up the day after tomorrow, rest well these 2 days. Okay. Chapter 11. He didn't send any more messages. When I returned home to the Smith family, it was already late at night. But no one was asleep, the lights were on, and the atmosphere was heavy and tense. Upon seeing me come in, my mother immediately stood up. Jane, have you figured out what to do? How did you manage this? How did you anger Robert to the point of wanting to call off the engagement? Yes, Jane, you know we rely on the Johnson family to sustain our business, right? 5 million, where are we supposed to get that now? Your sister-in-law is about to have triplets, are you trying to ruin us? Everyone was blaming me. Blaming me for not being able to hold Robert's heart, for not being able to smoothly marry into the family. Let them continue to suck our blood and eat our flesh. But back then, because of the concern for the health of the eldest daughter, they pushed out this sickly little daughter, me. Did they ever ask if I was willing? When they used the 100 million dowry from the Johnson family to fill the gap and maintain their luxurious lifestyle, did I ever enjoy a single penny? Now that the Johnson family wants to call off the engagement, they won't take a penny of the 5 million, but want me to bear it all. Fine, I'm willing to bear it, but after bearing it, I won't be a part of the Smith family anymore. Chapter 12. Jane, say something. My sister-in-law stood up and pushed me lightly, displeased. 50 million, I've figured out a solution. Do you really have a solution? I saw the sparkle in my mother's eyes immediately. Just that it might damage the reputation of our Smith family. What do you mean by that? I smiled lightly. At tonight's banquet, I met a wealthy businessman from the Philippines. After he learned about my situation, he's willing to pay 5 million for me. But, he has a wife and kids, so I can only be his mistress. I really have no choice, I can only agree. But in that case, if we are seen together, our relationship will be exposed. How could you do such a shameless thing? Yes, Jane, if you become someone's mistress, it will disgrace our entire family for generations. What do you suggest then? Should you sell some of the family's assets to come up with the $5 million for the Johnson family? There was silence, no one responded. Jane. My father, who had been quiet all this while, suddenly spoke up. The $5 million for the Johnson family must be paid. The reputation of the Smith family must also be upheld. I sneered deliberately, then why not just disown me as your daughter? My sister-in-law whispered while covering her belly, at least you know when to back off. Here's the deal. My father finally made a decision. The Smith family would announce publicly that they were cutting ties with me, but it would just be for show. I would still be considered a daughter of the Smith family, they wouldn't disown me. I knew very well that this was just a ploy by the Smith family to appease me. As soon as the $5 million was handed over to the Johnson family, I would be kicked out immediately. But they didn't know, this was exactly the outcome I desired. Chapter 13. The next morning at 9 o'clock, I received a call from Wyatt. Jane, check your text messages, the money should have been transferred. I quickly opened the message, indeed, the transfer had come through 10 minutes ago. I've received it. We'll handle the annulment today, I'll have the driver come pick you up. Wyatt, can I ask you for a favor? Go ahead. Could you, for now, keep our engagement a secret from others? I didn't want the greedy vampires from the Smith family to latch onto Wyatt and cause unnecessary trouble for him. Keep it a secret. Why is that? It's not forever, just for now, is that okay? All right, I'll have someone else pick you up. Once the $5 million was returned to Robert, the Smith family would publicly cut ties with me. Whether Wyatt wanted a public or private wedding, I would support him wholeheartedly. By cutting ties first, the Smith family would have no way to influence Wyatt. After transferring the money to Robert's account, I took a photo of the receipt for record. As Robert called, I saw in the classified section of the newspaper the announcement of the Smith family cutting ties with me. I stared at those lines of text seriously and read them over and over again. Then I continued to take a photo for safekeeping and carefully stored the newspaper. Robert's voice was hoarse. Jane, where did you get the money? $5 million is not a small amount. If the Smith family couldn't come up with it, who gave it to you? Be clear about it. All of this has nothing to do with you. You've received the money, and we have no more ties from now on. After saying that, I was about to hang up. But Robert suddenly called my name. Jane, do you think I did this for the $50 million? No matter what you did it for, it has nothing to do with me anymore. Jane, you should know, if I don't speak up, no man in H City would dare to take you. I chuckled lightly over the phone. Is that so? If you don't believe me, you can try. I didn't want to waste any more words with him, so I hung up directly. The phone rang again as soon as I hung up. I was about to block the number, but I saw 3 words flashing on the screen. Wyatt. Chapter 14. The Smith family wants to cut ties with you? How did you know? I was surprised. Wyatt was really well informed. Jane. Yes. If you're feeling upset, you don't have to hold it in. I really didn't want to cry, truly. From childhood to now, I've really grown accustomed to the point of numbness. I'm not upset. But when someone shows concern, people tend to be a bit more fragile. So as soon as I spoke, my voice was already tinged with tears. Jane, you can cry in front of me, after all. Starting tomorrow, I'll be your husband. Tears couldn't help but fall from my eyes, but before becoming my husband, I arranged another role for you. What role? I timidly said in a quiet voice. Wyatt was silent for half a minute before saying. So, my current role is a 60-year-old Chinese Filipino tycoon, and you are my mistress? Are you angry? On the phone, he let out a light sigh. Jane, see you tomorrow. Are you still going to marry me? Actually, I could clearly feel that he was a bit unhappy just now. Rest well today and wear your most beautiful dress tomorrow. Chapter 15. Wyatt must have made arrangements in advance. So the entire process of obtaining the license progressed very quickly. After receiving the documents, Wyatt took me to the hospital first. He held my hand the whole time, making us look very affectionate. His grandfather was very ill, barely managing to smile at me, looking somewhat relieved. I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. Deceiving a dying old man like this. He must love his excellent grandson very much, hoping that he could have a harmonious marriage. Little did he know, I couldn't even be considered Wyatt's real wife. After leaving the hospital, Wyatt had an important meeting to attend, so he had the driver take me back to get my luggage. The driver was the longtime driver for the Turner family, having watched Wyatt grow up. His hair was all white, but he was still very spirited. When the Smith family saw him helping me out of the car, they all assumed he was my benefactor. Disdainful of my current status as a mistress, no one paid me any attention. I brought down the suitcase from upstairs. Only my father said a few words to me. "This is just a temporary measure, you move out and stay somewhere else for a while. Jane, when things calm down, we'll bring you back." I asked him pitifully, "How long do I have to wait?" "It depends on the situation." "Then you better keep your word." "Don't worry." As I left with the suitcase, it was clear that the people from the Smith family breathed a sigh of relief. The driver took me to Wyatt's private residence. The house wasn't too big, but the environment was very peaceful. There were no crowds of maids and servants, which made me feel relaxed. "Madam, Mr. Wyatt instructed earlier that you can make yourself at home, he will come back in the evening." But at 8 o'clock in the evening, I received a call from Wyatt. He had to go abroad for a very important meeting and would probably return in about a week. "If you get bored, go out with friends to shop and have tea, don't stay cooped up at home all day." "Then I'll go stay at my small apartment for a few days, it's close to Central, convenient for everything. I'll come pick you up when I return." Okay. Chapter 16. On the third day of Wyatt's business trip, a volunteer I had worked with before called me. Invite me to participate in a small charity auction in the socialite circle. I was very interested in the theme this time, which was a charity fundraiser for children with congenital heart disease. When I arrived, I saw many familiar faces. Among them was Claire. However, she didn't look too well today, despite being dressed up as usual. It seems that being kicked off the boat that day had a greater impact on her than I had imagined. Claire also saw me but just chuckled sarcastically and then turned to talk to the people around her. "Is what you said true? Is she really becoming a mistress?" "Of course it's true. Her parents are ashamed of her, they've cut ties with her, haven't you read the newspapers? I heard her benefactor is almost 80, even as her grandfather, he's still well off." "Oh my God. How can we invite someone like her to a charity event?" "Yeah, we shouldn't be attending events with people like her, let's ask her to leave." The situation gradually became chaotic, and the socialite who invited me looked embarrassed. "Jane, how about you come back next time?" Not wanting to make things difficult for anyone, I stood up to leave voluntarily. Unexpectedly, as I walked to the door, I bumped into Robert. "Jane." I ignored him and continued walking outside. Robert grabbed my wrist. "Are you here to see me?" I pulled my hand away. "No. I just heard about your situation today." Robert stopped me again. "Jane, return the money." "Why?" I couldn't help but sneer. "Wasn't 50 million what you wanted?" "Jane." Robert's face darkened slightly. "I've said it, as long as you submit to me once." "How should I submit?" I pushed him away again. "Do you want me to kneel in front of you, groveling like a dog, thanking you for your generosity?" It's ironic, no one knows that the seemingly immaculate Johnson scion. Privately, his favorite thing to do is to use money and power to trample over people. My life may not be worth much, but I am not willing to humiliate myself like that. Chapter 17. Jane, your reputation is in ruins now, think about the consequences of your actions. Robert changed the subject. "You're young, becoming a mistress, your reputation is ruined for life." This was my own choice. "Jane, I'm giving you a way out." "Is it?" "Just not needed." I bypassed him and continued walking outside. Robert's voice sounded low behind me. Jane, I'm only giving you one chance. Think it over and come find me. I didn't look back. But that night, I received a call from the landlord. He ordered me to move out overnight. I didn't argue with him, just packed my belongings and went downstairs. Unexpectedly, as soon as I got downstairs, I saw Wyatt's car. The driver got out and took my suitcase. Madam, Mr. asked me to pick you up. Wyatt. Has he come back? Mr. is rushing back on tomorrow's early flight. I felt my eyes suddenly welling up. Has he finished all his work? It was supposed to be a week, but this was only the 4th day. Mr. is worried you might feel wronged. He's concerned. I'm fine, his work is important, don't let me delay him. I sat in the car, but my mind was in chaos. It was a complicated feeling that I couldn't describe. Like a pitiful bug abandoned by the world, suddenly possessing a gold mine. When we arrived at Wyatt's place, I had just returned to my room. His phone rang. Jane. Wyatt's voice carried a hint of weariness. I suddenly felt extremely ashamed. To get away from the Smith family, I deliberately tarnished my own reputation like this. His work was so demanding and tiring, yet I kept causing trouble for him. If I had just stayed honestly in his house, none of these things would have happened. Wyatt. I'm sorry. Jane. Wyatt sounded somewhat helpless. I didn't mean to blame you. Never mind, come back tomorrow and we'll talk properly. After hanging up, I received a friend request on WeChat. It was from Wyatt, so I accepted it. His moments only had one post, from 3 days ago, with just one picture. Our marriage certificate. I couldn't see what those commenting below were saying. All I could see were his 2 replies to friends' comments. Well, we're married. Introduction, my wife, Jane. Chapter 18. That night, I also posted a WeChat moment, with just 4 simple words. Getting married soon. Many people left messages asking, some friends even called me. When I answered, it was Robert's voice. So, have you figured it out? I did give you a chance, but I never said I would marry you. I couldn't help but chuckle. I never said the groom was you either. You're marrying that old man? Jane, you're willingly falling into this, rather be with a married man. I directly hung up the call and blocked him. That night, my mind was filled with so much stuff that I couldn't fall asleep. I only managed to sleep when dawn was near. I didn't even realize when Wyatt came back home. When I opened my eyes, I saw a figure coming out of the bathroom. I was almost scared to scream, my heart was about to jump out. It's me, Jane, I'm Wyatt, don't be afraid. I pressed my wildly beating heart, my face still a bit pale. Wyatt held me in his arms, gently stroking my back. Breathe slowly, don't be nervous, relax. It's okay, Jane. I leaned against his chest, it took me a while to calm down. After calming down, I suddenly noticed. I was only wearing a silk nightgown, and Wyatt, who had just taken a shower, was shirtless, wearing only boxers. I'm fine. I blushed and spoke softly, gently coming out of his embrace. Sorry for scaring you. Wyatt tidied my messy hair. Why did you sleep so long? I had trouble sleeping last night. I felt a bit uncomfortable, the nightgown was thin, I never wore a bra to sleep. Just now, being held tightly by him, with only a thin layer of fabric in between. My face was burning like a fever. I grabbed the blanket, wanting to cover myself up, but felt it would be too obvious. Just as I was unsure what to do, Wyatt helped me lie back down. Get some more sleep, it's almost noon, let's just have lunch directly. He naturally covered me with the thin blanket. I'll go to the study for a bit, I'll come get you soon. Watching him leave, I felt relieved, and let out a sigh. Chapter 19. During the day, he was mostly busy working in the study. It's just 9 at night, and after Wyatt came back to the master bedroom, he showed no intention of leaving. Actually, I have thought about fulfilling marital duties after marriage. After all, it was my own initial promise to comply with all his needs. I watched Wyatt come out of the bathroom. After hesitating for a while, I gently asked, "Are you sleeping here tonight?" Wyatt glanced at me, but remained silent. My mind was in chaos. Perhaps Wyatt just needed a wife in name only. Perhaps I was overthinking things. I hugged a pillow and got out of bed, trying tentatively, then, should I go sleep in the guest room? He still didn't say anything. I hugged the pillow and turned to walk away, but after a few steps, someone hugged me from behind. Didn't you say you would fully comply with my needs? Mr. Turner. My back was pressed against his strong chest. I could feel his heart beating vigorously. The temperature of his skin seemed to rise, burning me to the point of dizziness. Wyatt lowered his head, his fingers brushing through the twisted hair on my neck. Jane, you are my wife now. I leaned into his embrace, gently closing my eyes. I softened completely, allowing him to lift me and lay me down on the soft bed. As he leaned in to kiss me, my fingers tightly gripped his forearm. My heart was racing, almost feeling starved of oxygen. This kiss became intermittent. If anything feels uncomfortable, just tell me. Wyatt caressed my flushed face, and after my heartbeat gradually calmed down, he proceeded to the next step. Several times, I truly felt like I was about to suffocate. But Wyatt always managed to restrain himself at the right moment. I could feel the tense muscles in his body trembling faintly. Sweat beads dripped down from his forehead, falling on my chest, scorching hot. His heart was beating so intensely, his breath was rapid. I was uncomfortable, but he seemed even more so. Jane. His voice was husky, as he leaned down to gently kiss my face. Feeling better? I shook my head, then nodded. But my eyes were already clouded, my hands unknowingly tightly gripping his neck. Like pushing away, yet more like yielding. Lust filled his eyes. For a brief moment, I even had the illusion that Wyatt liked me. Jane. He lowered himself again, with increasing force. In the end, it felt like I lost consciousness for 2 seconds, but it wasn't as painful as before. Instead, I felt like I was floating on clouds, enveloped in softness. Until Wyatt woke me up. Jane, is there anywhere uncomfortable? Again, I shook my head, just gently reaching out to hug his waist. Women seem to have a natural dependence on their first man. Wyatt held me in his arms. Rest for a while, then go take a bath. He said, his fingers resting on my heart. Is your heart feeling uncomfortable? It's fine. I thought about the several pauses halfway through. I couldn't help but ask him softly, Wyatt, are you feeling uncomfortable? He held my face and kissed me, his voice husky. If you keep asking, I might really feel uncomfortable. I won't. Okay, I won't. But he didn't let go of me. I just wanted to kiss Jane. I stayed silent, obediently letting him kiss me. But in my foggy mind, I was thinking. When he calls me Jane, it seems like he's really indulgent. But a person as strict and self-disciplined as him would probably only do so in bed. Chapter 20. I didn't have a chance to verify this guess of mine. Because early the next morning, Wyatt left again. I knew he was extremely busy. After all, in his position, big and small matters were countless. So, I stayed at home, trying not to cause him any more trouble. Even though I didn't go out, the days were exceptionally peaceful and quiet. At 21, this was the first time I felt the beauty of peaceful years. No need to worry about being treated like a commodity by family. No need to feel hurt due to the favoritism of parents and relatives. I didn't need to think about anything, just do things that made me happy. I even picked up the piano I had abandoned for years. Bought an online painting course, and started learning oil painting. I spent almost a week without leaving the house. One afternoon, Wyatt suddenly called me, saying there was a party in the evening for me to attend. He had already prepared formal wear and jewelry, and a styling team would come to the house later. Will you go tonight? I'll come over after finishing my work. What kind of party is it? Do I have to go? It's a charity fundraising dinner to help children with congenital heart disease. I think you would want to go. My heart couldn't help but be touched. The last time I couldn't attend the charity event due to Claire spreading malicious blackmail, it was also for the preparation of congenital heart disease children. It turns out Wyatt still remembers this matter. Because I have a weak heart since birth, I have always been very concerned about this area. I remember that even after getting engaged to Robert, I still steadfastly went to do volunteer work every month. To visit children in orphanages who were sick or disabled. But Robert once sneered at me, doing things to gain fame and praise, you seem quite adept at it. But he didn't know that I wasn't doing it for fame and praise. Just because I have experienced such suffering, I just want to help more children like me. Wyatt, of course, I am willing to attend, but if you come over in the evening, our affairs won't be able to be kept a secret. I wanted to ask him if it would cause you trouble, or have a bad impact. Jane, from the beginning, the one who said they wanted to keep things private temporarily was you, not me. Wyatt. I held the phone, murmuring somewhat puzzledly, I don't quite understand, why? Why did he agree to me? Why did he never think about hiding the fact that he is married to me? Why, of all people, me? I'll answer you when I get home tonight. Chapter 21. When I arrived at the venue of the dinner, naturally, I attracted countless curious glances. But what made me a little puzzled was, since Wyatt would attend the charity event, the standard was naturally not ordinary. The Johnson family could attend, but the Smith family definitely couldn't. However, Robert was here, and people from the Smith family were also present. As I walked in, the Smith family was warmly surrounding Robert. And my own biological older sister Lynn, looking at Robert with a shy yet passionate gaze. Jane, how do you have the face to come here? After Lynn opened her mouth in surprise, Mrs. Smith immediately walked over with a stern face. Jane, don't you know what kind of occasion this is? You've come here to make a spectacle of yourself. How do you think people will see our Smith family? I looked at the elegant and dignified lady in front of me, with no ripples in my heart. Hasn't the relationship been severed and announced in the newspapers? So, I have no relationship with the Smith family. Making a spectacle of myself won't reflect on the Smith family. But you still carry the Smith surname. Who in H City doesn't know you're my daughter? So what do you suggest? Jane, leave H City, let your benefactor take you abroad, or go back to the Philippines. Dad didn't promise me that once the limelight passed, he would let me come back, right? Mrs. Smith looked at me as if I were delusional. What are you daydreaming about? The Smith family genealogy has already disowned you. Really? Of course. So, it means that legally or in terms of blood relationship, I have no connection with the Smith family anymore? Yes. Good. I turned around and looked around. I believe everyone heard Mrs. Smith's words. Jane, you better leave quickly. Why make a spectacle and lose face unnecessarily? Lynn pretended to be gentle and generous. Robert is here too, don't make a fool of yourself. At this point, Robert also spoke up. Jane, didn't you say you were getting married? Robert, he has a wife and children in the Philippines, mistresses all over the world, how could he possibly marry her? So, was your social media post that day fake? I was about to say something when Robert stepped forward and grabbed my arm. Jane, let me ask you again. Before he could finish his sentence, the banquet hall suddenly fell silent. Mr. Turner is here. Why would Mr. Turner attend such a small banquet? I have no idea, but we're really lucky tonight to actually see Mr. Turner in person. Why is Mr. Turner coming over this way? Oh my, why is Mr. Turner looking in this direction? Is he looking at Miss Smith from the Smith family? It seemed like Lynn heard these discussions. Her face quickly turned red. Mrs. Smith couldn't hide her joy on her face. I turned to look at Wyatt. He was still in a black business suit, looking very serious and unapproachable. At this moment, I couldn't help but feel a little dazed. This man I had only seen on TV and in newspapers before. Now, he's my husband. He is really gentle with me, like a very, very good husband. Jane. Wyatt spoke up. This was the first time he called my name in public. Chapter 22. The smile on Lynn's face froze somewhat comically. Mrs. Smith also seemed stunned. Robert, on the other hand, looked bewildered. I shook off his hand with force, my eyes slightly red with a sense of grievance. Wyatt. He made his way through the crowd and walked straight up to me. The dress you're wearing today is very beautiful. The makeup suits you very well, you look very beautiful. Wyatt. I felt like crying and laughing at the same time. Just as tears were about to fall from my eyes, Wyatt, in front of everyone, pulled me into his arms. All right, I was just a few minutes late, and you're already being bullied. When he mentioned the word bullied, his gaze casually swept over the crowd. Mrs. Smith went pale, and Lynn instinctively moved behind her. Wyatt's gaze finally landed on Robert's face. "Robert, what were you talking about with my wife just now?" The word wife in Wyatt's words was like a bomb. The previously silent crowd instantly erupted into a buzz of discussion. Robert still seemed incredulous, hesitantly asking, "Wife?" "Yes, Jane is my wife." As Wyatt's voice fell, Mrs. Smith suddenly seemed to come to her senses, taking a few steps towards me and intimately grabbing my arm. "Jane, you child, how could you not tell your mother about such a big joy?" I pushed her hand away. "Mrs. Smith, I am no longer a member of the Smith family." Mrs. Smith was taken aback, hastily saying, "How could there be any grudge between us as mother and daughter? We can just talk it out." I shook my head. "There's nothing to talk about. There's absolutely no connection between me and the Smith family, as the family genealogy shows." Mrs. Smith was sweating profusely, looking imploringly at Wyatt. "Mr. Turner, you see, our Jane is still quite childish, she's still holding a grudge against me. I'll listen to my wife." Wyatt held me close, his voice cold. "Jane said she has no relationship with the Smith family, then there is no relationship." "Mr. Turner." Mrs. Smith seemed lost. "Mrs. Smith." Wyatt suddenly spoke up. "As far as I know, the Smith family has not made any donations to charity in the past decade." Upon hearing this, Mrs. Smith immediately started sweating profusely, stiffly trying to argue back but failing to say a word. "So, not a single donation has been made, and yet every charity banquet the Smith family rushes to attend. What for? Chasing after fame and reputation. How shameless." Unable to bear it any longer, Mrs. Smith left in embarrassment, taking Lynn with her. Wyatt held me close. "Jane, let's go home too. We haven't made donations to the children yet," I quietly reminded him. Wyatt lowered his head and kissed me. "The secretary has left." Chapter 23. Wyatt. My heart, it's failing. In the dim room, I felt dizzy in waves. The familiar sense of suffocation hit me, and I gripped his arm, turning my face to breathe heavily. Wyatt crouched down, gently touching foreheads with me. "Jane." I could feel how difficult this moment was for him. But my body was being so uncooperative. "Wyatt. Maybe you should marry a healthy wife." "Jane." Rare seriousness flickered in Wyatt's eyes. "There's no shortage of healthy women in the world. But I am like this. What's wrong with you?" He brushed aside the damp strands of hair on my forehead. "Jane, in my eyes, you are the best." "Wyatt. If your health is poor, we'll take it slow, treat it gradually. If it can't be treated here, we'll go elsewhere, even overseas. And if it still can't be cured?" Wyatt leaned down and kissed me tenderly. "Then I will practice abstinence and focus on self-improvement, taking care of our family and country." Chapter 24. As the new year approached, Wyatt finally had some free time. He took me on a trip to City B, where the best cardiac surgeons are said to be. I was quite nervous during the examination. "We'll do what we can, and leave the rest to fate." Wyatt habitually fixed my hair for me. "Go on, I'll be waiting here for you." After all the detailed and professional examinations were completed, the elderly expert with white hair looked at me with a hint of regret. "I have reviewed your test results. Among congenital heart disease patients, you are not considered severe. If you had undergone surgery intervention in your childhood, you would have been healthy by now." I stared at the doctor in disbelief, shaking my head repeatedly. "Doctor, are you mistaken? My family has always told me that my condition is incurable. They took me to many hospitals, all with the same diagnosis. Eventually, I refused to go to hospitals anymore, unwilling to listen to my death sentence over and over again. They told me that I could only survive by spending money to take meticulous care of myself, that I could live and grow up because of their generosity." It was only when Wyatt embraced me that I realized tears were streaming down my face unknowingly. They lied to me, didn't they? Why did they deceive me? Why treat me like this? If you are not willing to treat me, you can throw me away, give me away. Why lie to me, deceive me for so many years? Jane, don't think about these questions. Your recovery is the most important, more than anything else, do you understand? I just can't figure it out. Wyatt hugged me tighter. "Then don't think about those meaningless things, let's look forward, don't look back." Chapter 25. When spring blossomed, White came to pick me up and take me back to City H. By then, I had already been discharged safely, and my body was recovering quite well. A few days ago, his grandfather was critically ill and he received a notification. He rushed back to City H overnight. It wasn't until the day before yesterday that his grandfather passed through the gates of death once again, his condition stabilizing, that he finally relaxed. It had been exactly half a month since we last saw each other. Wyatt got out of the car but did not come towards me. We had an agreement before. The next time we met, I had to run to his side. Like any healthy girl would. He opened his arms. I lifted my skirt and ran down the steps, through the garden filled with green and yellow, running lightly in the spring breeze. For the first time in 21 years, I ran like this. Even the slightly chilly spring wind felt warm. I disregarded everything and threw myself into his arms. I tilted my face up to kiss him. But today I was wearing flat shoes, and he was just too tall. I could only stand on my tiptoes. Yet he lowered his head to meet my kiss. Chapter 26. It had been almost a year since I married Wyatt. But that night was the first time I saw him indulge himself. He kissed the scar on my chest, the mark left by the surgery still clear, somewhat ugly. I didn't want him to see it, so I raised my hand to cover it. But Wyatt refused. Is it very ugly? Just as beautiful as that night. So you lusted after me from the beginning. No, even earlier than you think. When was that? Have you seen me before? Jane, are you sure you want to reminisce with your husband at this moment? Wyatt held my hands and bent down once again. Wyatt. I feel dizzy, can't breathe. I pretended once again. Naturally, he didn't believe it, but still stopped at the most intense moment. My heart was beating fast, but it no longer felt like tearing pain. A surge of emotions was bubbling in my chest, an unstoppable tide. I took the initiative to approach him, lightly biting his chin. Wyatt, you don't have to worry about my body anymore. From now on, you can do whatever you want. I have seen Wyatt being serious and diligent during presentations at the Bay Area conference. I have also seen him conducting international meetings in the office, fluent in English, French, and Cantonese. In private at home, he also had a relaxed and easygoing side. Even the household servants dared to exchange a few jokes with him. But as soon as he put on a serious expression, everyone around him fell silent. And at this moment, there was a clear desire and a strong possessiveness in his eyes. He allowed himself to indulge in desire, falling into the red dust with me. In endless pleasure, he seemed to be more unrestrained and deeply invested than me. In the past, I didn't understand why someone so close would treat me like this. Later, I understood. The suffering and grievances I endured for 21 years were just to let me meet Wyatt again. Wyatt, are you? This was the first time I asked. Before I could finish, Wyatt seemed to know what I was going to ask. His kiss landed on my ear, his warm and moist fingers entwined tightly with mine. I heard his voice, slightly hoarse and seductive. Jane, I like you.
Extra, Wyatt's perspective. When Jane was 16, she often volunteered on weekends and holidays. During adolescence, many girls go through a slightly awkward period due to development. But Jane had already grown into a very beautiful and captivating young woman. Due to illness, she was naturally solitary in nature. As a result, she was even more aloof. The first time Wyatt saw her, he accompanied his grandfather to the church to pray. She volunteered with the children from the orphanage to participate in the choir. While the children sang, she played the piano in a white dress. At the end of the choir, when they were supposed to take a group photo, she, who should have been in the middle, was pushed into a corner. She didn't fight back, quietly stood in the last row, inconspicuously took a photo. No one would pay attention to such a small incident, but at that moment, his grandfather suddenly said to him, "Look at that girl playing the piano, so young yet so composed." He also looked at her more because of this. He was 24 at the time, full of ambition and eager to make a career for himself. His heart was entirely focused. At that moment, only a faint impression remained in his mind. She looked very beautiful in her dress. The second time he saw her was at her engagement party with Robert. Because his grandfather had some acquaintance with the elders of the Johnson family, and the Johnsons invited them multiple times, he naturally had to show his face. He went to the engagement party that day. Many people were discussing the female lead of the day. But there were two underlying meanings in the conversations. 1. Miss Smith from the Smith family was indeed beautiful, but unfortunately, she was not in good health. 2. Although the Johnson family was not lacking in wealth, the Smith family, as a fallen household, even if Miss Smith was beautiful, it seemed like the Johnson family was still at a loss. He somehow became interested and looked up on the stage. Jane was still wearing a very beautiful white dress. But she looked lifeless. Like a meticulously dressed puppet, lacking any vitality and liveliness in her eyes. He somehow thought of that very hot summer day. The children in the choir sang with angelic voices. The girl sitting at the piano was gentle and quiet. Standing in the corner of the last row, she was calm and smiling. Her eyes were bright, with a gleam of moisture. Compared to the stiff puppet on the stage now, there was no way to overlap the two. When Robert kissed her, he suddenly turned away for some unknown reason. With his workload getting heavier, he rarely thought about that person he had barely crossed paths with. Occasionally, during leisure time, he would gather with family members for meals. Among cousins and sisters, Jane's name would occasionally come up. It's really pitiful, first being sold off by her family, and Robert doesn't even care for her. Yeah, I heard they've been engaged for 2 years, and Robert has never set foot in the Smith household. I think this marriage is doomed. Why did Robert agree to the engagement in the first place? If it was for her beauty, then why ignore her after the engagement? He stood behind the lush low tree and found himself holding his breath. I heard from a distant Johnson family member, Robert did indeed have some interest in her at first, so the Smith family took advantage of the situation, and he went along with it. But that Miss Smith, although sickly, her private life is quite scandalous. No way, I've met Jane several times, we often volunteer together, she really seems like a good girl. It was her older sister Lynn who accidentally let it slip, it shouldn't be fake. Why did she act so recklessly? It seems like when she was 16 or 17, she dated a lot of guys. Before getting engaged to Robert, she even had secret meetings with other men at hotels. The Smith family had to pay a lot of money to barely cover it up until after the engagement party. Think about it, someone as proud as Robert, could he really swallow this humiliation? So after the engagement party, Jane was sent back to the Smith family. For the sake of face, Robert could only cover up the scandal, but from then on, he deeply despised Jane. Why didn't he just break off the engagement then? Maybe he did genuinely like her, so he was unwilling to let go, but conflicted by what Jane did. He's in a tough spot, right? I still can't believe Jane would do such a thing. You mentioned secret meetings at hotels. Do you have any photos? I think I've seen some, let me find them. Cousin, why did you come over? Suddenly, he pushed through the bushes and walked out. The girls were all startled, quickly stood up, and politely greeted him. His expression at that moment was probably not very pleasant. In the lively garden, it instantly became eerily silent. Have you all finished your homework? Speaking ill of others here? The Turner family had very strict family rules, especially towards the girls. Their upbringing was particularly strict. It's fine for young girls to gossip in private gatherings, but what they were saying today had indeed crossed a line. If the elders found out, there might be consequences. Everyone was nearly in tears from being scared. He scolded them harshly, until each one promised tearfully never to speak ill of others again. Then he turned and left. For the next few days, his mood was constantly down. That weekend, he had some rare free time and went to church with his grandfather. And he encountered her again. Still wearing a simple dress, accompanying the children on the piano. But she seemed even thinner, her eyes always seemed to be filled with a layer of misty sorrow. She played a wrong note, panicked, her face turned pale, and the music stopped. Someone came over and scolded her mercilessly. She sat there with her head down, on the verge of tears. But in the following performance, there was not a single mistake. He couldn't help but look at her. He even thought, if tears fell from her eyes, he would definitely stand up and walk over. But in the end, she didn't cry. However, as he was leaving, he couldn't help but turn back, quietly approach the priest, and asked him to pass on a message to her. You look really beautiful playing the piano in a dress. I hope you can be a bit happier. Later on, the banquet in City H that night, a momentary decision, led to a lifelong relationship. The moment he unbuttoned her dress. In fact, he had already made up his mind. No matter what, at any cost. He had to take her away from Robert and then marry her. But he didn't expect that she would take the initiative to say to him that she wanted to be his wife. He endured his increasingly rapid heartbeat. In the calmest tone, he presented his condition to her. Within 3 days, they had to get their marriage certificate. The moment she agreed, he was as happy as if he had returned to his youth. The moment he helped her tidy up her hair. She wouldn't know how much self-control he had to exert to hold himself back. Not to kiss her abruptly. To have her put on the most beautiful dress and go with him to get married. Little by little, he would find back in his memory that most beautiful Jane. Luckily, he finally got what he wanted.